Okay, welcome back to my video podcast on the future of business and technology. And today we want to dive into how MasterCard is using artificial intelligence. And to help me untangle this, I'm joined today by Ed McLaughlin, who is the president and CTO of MasterCard. Welcome, Ed.
Great to be here. Good to see you.
Yeah, hopefully I got your name roughly right.
It's in the ballpark.
Yeah. So where are you joining us from today?
I'm joining you from London, so
Very good.
in our
Where you
offices here.
where are you normally based?
Normally, I spend a lot of time in New York. Our headquarters are in Purchase there, and we have main operating hubs around the world. So in
Very
St.
good.
Louis, New York, Dublin, Pune, India, Sydney, Australia.
Very good. And so you're the CTO and president. What does that mean? How do you spend your day?
So two great parts of what I get to do. One is every day we run the payments network. Run one of the world's great payment networks, and we make sure it's there all the time, every time, for everyone who depends on us. But the technology side is also where we build the future for MasterCard. In many ways, the future of commerce and payments is MasterCard's a big part of that. So we get to do both. We make sure everything is operating, MasterCard good, as we say, and we also get a chance to help invent a little bit of the future.
Very good. So let's dive into AI then. So I have covered MasterCard in a number of my books of how you're using AI is an
Yeah.
important part, but I'd love you to take us through how MasterCard is using AI, how important AI has been, and maybe where you are now and where you think this is going as well, especially as we've seen such a transformation in AI with generative AI,
Yes.
and now we're getting into the spotlight. So I'd love you to give us an overview.
Yeah, AI has been an essential capability for MasterCard for years now, and we see it only increasing the importance and impact it can have on what we're doing. So maybe just a little bit of a frame might be helpful for folks of what MasterCard actually does. We're not the bank. We don't issue the cards. We don't, sell the goods. We make it all work. So we run a globe spanning network. Last year, we did around 150 billion payments. Each payment is a dozen transactions in a TPS sense. So we're in a substantial network that's there. The key things for us, though, is the growth that we're seeing. We are doubling about every 5 years. If you think of the endpoints, 5 years ago, we had about 48 million merchants. We're now well over 100 million places that you can use your MasterCard. And the reliability that we need to provide. We're structurally significant, designated in countries around the world. We're a big part of the economy. So the reliability, the resilience that we have to have is a big part of what we do. And then what we think about the most is we have over 3 billion accounts on the network. And that's people's savings. It's their line of credit. It's what they need to use every day to get their lives done. So when you're in London and you're getting on the tube, we have less than 200 milliseconds for that gate to open from the time you tap. And that's really important to everybody every day. So that's what we do with the network. Now, when we think about what AI has done for us and what we're even more excited about what we'll do in the future, it's things around the security of the network, making sure that we can keep it safe and secure for everyone that uses it. Things like fighting fraud to make sure that scams or frauds or other things can't happen through the network. It gives us a great chance to personalize what we're doing. So rather than having one big global network, we can make it profoundly meaningful for every user on the network, as we can bring that together for better individual experiences and whatever context they want to use their MasterCard or use the network within. And then for everything we do technically, it's also a pretty big human endeavor. So the things we can do to help people at MasterCard do their best work, to be more productive, to get more results for what they want to do by leveraging powerful tools to do that. So we really see AI as having a major impact across all aspects of our business, from the services we provide to how we do our work.
Very good. So when I talk to businesses, I always say that today you have to see yourself as an AI company, or at least
Yes.
an AI-enabled company. So how would you, when you look at your own, when you look at MasterCard,
Mhm.
how would you position AI strategically in the business?
I really like how you framed that out because I think AI enables, it enhances, it informs everything we do. But it's not an end to itself. You don't do AI to do AI. You say, what are the hardest problems we've been trying to solve? That we now have new capabilities, new techniques, and you don't invent the future by trying to pretend the world has become something else. You got to be more of who you should be. So we always think about applied research. How do we bring this in and use it to keep our promises better, to improve what we have that's out there? And that's absolutely informed what we're doing. So we've been going from deep analytics to machine learning to AI to generative AI, pursuing this for years. Forbes Magazine Innovation CIO Innovation of the Year Award in 2019 went to MasterCard for what we call our decision management platform, which is our main production implementation version of AI. So when I think about how it applies to us, I'll give you two quick examples. We think a lot about attacks on the network. That's the cybersecurity side. And then attacks or crimes that people want to run through the network. And that's the fraud and the scams that we need to prevent. So what we've worked on for years is building progressive intelligence into the network itself for every one of those transactions that's flying by in milliseconds, so we can make incredibly complex decisions. So the heart of it is we call our decision management platform. That's our AI brains or engine that runs in the network. Many things it does, but I'll highlight two. One of which is just fraud scoring on the transactions. Does this thing match the broad patterns we've seen across the network? Because a fraud surge that's hitting Brazil is going to be in Portugal next. We just know it. These are global. So we can bring the entire intelligence to the network, everything we've seen, and bring that to bear to score every transaction. And the advanced AI techniques continue to help us. You probably remember years ago with old rules-based systems where you'd get declined for odd reasons. It didn't make sense, or you'd have to call your bank and say, I really am in Portugal, it's me, right? If you've noticed over the years, most of that has gone away. And what we really focused on is not only finding more fraud, and the last 12 months or so, we've stopped over $20 billion worth of fraud in the network. And that's not the potential fraud. That's when they got tired and tried something else because it wasn't working. So you get that kind of an impact. But what we set our goal or our optimization for isn't the bad guys, isn't the fraud. It's making sure more good transactions can go through, that you can do what you want to do. And through applying some of the new techniques, we've seen an 85% reduction in false positives. That's it working for and giving you what you want. So when we think about just about every activity we do at MasterCard, we're saying, how can we take that goal, let you do what you want to do, and make sure everything you're doing is safe, and apply progressively new techniques and applied research and AI to accomplishing that goal.
Very good. And yeah, and a lot of this is traditional machine learning that is just getting better. What is the role of generative AI? Where do you see the biggest applications?
Exactly right. So a lot of what we do on the network, we're dealing with structured information. So machine learning works great. You can run
Yeah.
through it, you can get the insights, you can apply it, you can run it very lightweight in production, which also makes it quite effective that way. Much of what I'm saying for generative AI are two things. One, the generative aspect of that. I'll touch on that in a second. And also all the amazing capabilities it can give us to deal with unstructured information and richer interfaces with users, whether it's our own staff or working with people who are customers of the network, infusing personalization into our tools the way that we couldn't before. So on the generative side of it, we're using generative techniques, it's not transformer, but a recurrent neural network, where because we can take a limited data set and then project out much bigger implications of that, we found a 20% improvement in that fraud detection that we've talked about, and up to 300% improvement in certain sectors that the ML techniques weren't great on, that the recursive techniques or recurrent techniques are really helpful for. Another great example, though, might be dealing with the unstructured information, because no matter what we do, there's a lot of complexity into a network. So the ability to take all of our rules and the franchise and the requirements, the ability to take our APIs and development interfaces, the ability to take a lot of that complexity and move from a hierarchical manual-based system to more of a prompt-based interactive system. We're doing this right now for a lot of our people who interact with customers and customer service like that, so they can get better and faster input to MasterCard information. As that matures, the ability to put it directly to our customers themselves so they can get that type of thing, and we can even skip the interaction. They can have both self-service, and we can continue to get our folks focused more and more on customer success rather than customer support. So that's where the unstructured information is really giving us a new layer of potential sort of improvement and productivity that we can put out there. So again, both on the product side for what we're delivering, new techniques can enhance what we have, and for the productivity side, a breakthrough in dealing with unstructured information and user interface capabilities.
Very good. So MasterCard seems to be able to pick the right strategic use cases for AI and then really make it work at scale. And this is something that I believe lots of companies are struggling with.
Yeah.
I see lots of organizations playing around with AI. There are lots of proof of concepts going on, but very little that really makes a strategic impact, especially when it comes to more traditional organizations. So I would love to better understand your process of how do you decide where to apply AI. So what's the process that you go through at MasterCard? And how do you then decide which AI technologies to adopt and which ones to avoid?
That is the question. That is a perfect insight, because you're exactly right. I always lead with, if it doesn't scale, it doesn't matter.
Hmm.
And whenever there's new tools and techniques like this, it's exciting. There's lots of things you can do with it. And I encourage play. I think it's great for people to get familiar with it. I think the ability to have wide-ranging conversations and think about the potential. And then you have to just judge what's the clarity of how cool it would be with the proximity of how close you are to actually getting value out of it. I've talked to my team about this a lot. I'm sure with what you were covering maybe a dozen years ago, everyone had to ever end every sentence with "and on the blockchain." And you're like, you just need a database. I mean, why would you take over all that impedance, right? There's amazing things we've done with blockchain in environments where it's hard to establish trust. It's a great new solution for that. And we have multi-token network. We're working with financial institutions, with banks and governments on central bank digital currencies. But it's a dozen years later as we're saying, okay, where does this new technology actually allow us to do things we could never do before? I think that's the exact question we have here with AI. Not could you do this with AI, but what's the problem you can never solve that this will now allow you to do? So again, I think you should never look to shut down the experimentation and creativity, but nor should you confuse a prototype with production. And the hard rules, math always wins, of scale, of ROI, of operational efficiency and efficacy, and comparing what you have to what you had before. So you asked about how we think about it at MasterCard. We have a couple of things. We have, as any responsible institution should, an AI review board. First, we look at what is the data that you're going to source, what's the provenance of it, what's the promises you've made around that data, can we use it for this application? What's the problem we're trying to solve? Would we be able to make sure that there's not a lot of unintended consequences there? So that review is really important. I think many organizations have started thinking about that. We also have subsequent deep technological reviews of saying, can you run this at scale? I think people are learning that running inference engines at high scale can be punishingly expensive. So not only will we get a net positive return or benefit from doing this, can we do it in a way where overall it is more positive for the business? I think that's really the level of maturization I'm seeing more and more for people that I'm talking to. And that's why we're kind of lucky, because we had so much structured information and we had such a use case with fighting fraud and security. We have dozen years, almost 2 decades of experience of running models in AI in production. So that's what we're really what we're bringing back to this analysis. We'll do things like, we call it silent mode validation, where we'll run a new model or an AI technique in production in parallel with what we already have, And then you can say, is the delta worth the additional expense? And then it becomes pretty straightforward, a pretty clear decision. So I always start again with what's the hardest problem? What are the things that we could never have solved before that this might have a chance to? And then you look and say, okay, does it really work today? Think of self-driving cars. It's been clear the potential societal and benefits and implications that for years, you just have to make sure the technology is actually where you wished it was.
Mm.
And that's the test you apply. And then the other thing I would say, and this is a really important learning we've always had for operationalization, your world changes. If you're fighting fraud again, when you get really good at stopping a particular attack vector, the adversary moves. So you have to also be very careful of concept drift of your models. I think sometimes people look at models more like source code. I'm going to build something, and then that exact thing will run the exact same way forever. Not that your inputs are constantly changing. Those inputs changing will change your outputs and could even destabilize the underlying model itself. So run governance is also something we look at a lot to make sure the model efficacy doesn't decline over time, or worse, you don't get unintended consequences from that. So quickly reviewing the intent, provenance of data, all of those type of things for responsible and ethical use of the techniques, very, very important, particularly with a lot of national law coming out that you have to make sure you're compliant with. The technical review, can you do it? The business review, is this actually better than what you've got? And then on the runtime, the constant monitoring, competency and controls, and feedback loop of what you have out there. I think all of that's really necessary to take, again, one of the things I am most enthusiastic about in the world, and saying, here's how we can actually use it to make a material difference for our business.
Very good. So what's the makeup of this AI review panel? Because this is something I see in organizations. Sometimes you just have technical people, sometimes you have business people, sometimes you bring them together. Then you have an ethicist maybe joining. What's the makeup of your AI review panel?
One thing I would very much recommend is kind of a 2-cycle engine, because we start with, again, legal, privacy, product, business intent, right? And that is really, really important to understand, hey, what are we trying to do here? Should we do it? Can we do it? Things of that nature. If and as it looks like you have a value you can create there, and it's something we're enthusiastic about doing it, then the hard technical review of, can this be done? Which tools and techniques would apply for it? Where do you have? So I don't want to waste time, really, really valuable engineering time and cycles on things which are just somebody's sort of good idea, if there's a huge impediment why we want to do it in the first place. But then after you decide, yeah, this is something what we want to go after, the great minds on privacy and ethics and all of that can really take a step back, and then you apply the engineering talent to say, let's try to make this happen. So I think it's a right brain, left brain kind of thing. And we have a little bit of separation there, which has been helpful for us, because there's a whole lot of ideas that don't make it to that second stage. And then when you hit the second stage, you get really, really good parameters and guidelines set, so the engineering can be focused on actually solving the problem.
So how do you make sure that AI is used ethically then across the organization? Do you have any clear guidelines or policies in place? Do you have people that make sure they look at the ethics? I know that MasterCard is a founding member of the Harvard Council for Responsible Use of AI. So what does that mean in practice? How do you make sure you look at the ethical implications of AI?
Yeah. So we have said from the beginning that the only AI is responsible AI. And it's good business in many ways. One of the first things I'd say is our brand is based on trust. People have to trust using the network. They have to understand what we're doing. And the more we can give them confidence that we're doing things responsibly, I think the more we're actually able to take advantage of it. So we, as you said, we're a founding member of the Council for Ethical Use of AI. Digital Europe, which is looking at a lot of AI and data and other things. We're a big sponsor there. The AI Safety Council in the US. I really do think a good private-public conversation around this is essential. And one quick digression, I'll get back to the at MasterCard. I think what I've been doing technology a long, long time. I think what new techniques and technological capabilities sometimes do is force us to look at resolve unanswered questions. So when it comes down to something like privacy, I think everyone was comfortable. I use a US example. If you pull someone into the police precinct and they flip through a mug book of the usual suspects to see if, that was someone they would recognize or would knock them down. We were comfortable with that. Very, very powerful image recognition system scanning everyone coming out of a transit stop. I think people are kind of uncomfortable with that. So the principle has never really been clearly established. And I think a lot of what we thought was privacy was actually obscurity. And now we need to establish as society, how do we feel about these things? And then as engineers, we can certainly make sure all the right constraints and everything else are there. So these public-private conversations about the implications, I don't actually think are about AI itself. That's just a general purpose technology. It's like saying, what are the implications of wheels? But I think it's much more saying, now that these techniques are so powerful, things like privacy versus obscurity, we've got to talk about. So the more we can engage, the more we can have this as a public and open conversation, I think the better it is for everyone. Now, unilaterally, what MasterCard's done is years ago, we published a data bill of rights to our consumers. Your data is your data. You have the right to know what data we have from you. You have the right to know how we're using that data. We'll use the data to improve the service that we're giving to you. I think everyone's really, really comfortable and happy for us to fight more fraud because the only loser is the criminals using that data across the service. But there's other uses which would be out of band of that promise we've made or engagement we have with a consumer, and we have no desire to do that, or certainly no desire to do that without their consent. So maybe I would opt in for something like an advertising optimization rather than making it part of the default service. So we've put that data bill of rights out there, making sure the AI is good. I think we don't talk about this enough. I mentioned earlier silent mode validation, making sure the techniques you put up aren't going to have unintended consequences. Make sure you're monitoring how they're running, making sure it is good technology is a huge obligation that's there and something we take quite seriously. Talk about things like the concept drift and other things of that nature. And then really just thinking about, we talked about the review boards, the intent, the purposes, and being very, very clear. And I'll kind of end at the beginning of data is AI and AI is data. They're inseparable topics. So what's the provenance of the information you're basing your models on? What happens to the data as you engage with some of the engines that are out there and make sure that the rights and ownership you have it under, you're not unintentionally violating things of that nature. So how we use these tools and techniques in some sense is not different from how you use any powerful technology or anything which impacts people generally. But I think there's a lot of specific things to AI that we spend a lot of time thinking about. And these public-private partnerships to establish the underlying principles so we can get our practices right are very important.
Very good. You talked about the use of AI internally to drive your business processes, to make them better, make them more efficient, and also about your products. I believe that AI will augment everyone's jobs.
Yes.
And so I would love to understand your take on it. What do you see the impact of AI will be on how the business functions internally, on the jobs of people, and how does MasterCard make sure that your people are prepared for this? So reskilling, upskilling of the workforce to keep pace with these huge advances and fast advances in technology and AI.
Yeah, I am with you entirely. I think it is all about human computer interaction. And, the idea of a jobless future is just one, I'm an inveterate optimist, but my lists have lists. There's so much more work we can do. There's so much more creativity we can have. I think the whole story of human endeavor is harnessing power so we can do more, whether it's mechanical, electrical, animal, cognitive, whatever that is, it has helped us. And I come entirely from that. I also think people mush a lot together. It's AI, it's productivity, and things of that nature. I have three big categories I usually use. One, we talk about toil elimination. What are things that you're going to have to do, and then the next day you're just going to have to do it again? What a great thing to offload or automate. So how can we take the things which are purely toil and let the systems do it as they can get more capable and smarter, and put the humans in more of a supervisory mode? Everyone loves that. The second category is where you're going, this idea, and full props to Microsoft for branding Copilot. The whole idea of the support and assistance and how you can do what you do better because you have those tools for that. I think there's a huge unlock there. And I'll come back to that in a second. And then the third category, which is really exciting, think about some of the fraud things we've talked about. What are the things that you could never do with humans? What are new value you can create because you couldn't see as much data, you couldn't react fast enough, right? We have a circuit breaker in the network we call it safety net that'll stop a runaway fraud condition before an alert could even go out to a human operator. Why? Because we're really comfortable in the AI that has distilled that knowledge and understanding, and we can now put it into the network. But to the primary conversation you were having about this human-computer interaction, and there's amazing work happening now. There's a bunch of stuff coming out, for example, the University of Washington in Seattle, which I just love. But we've broken into what we call workbenches. Because just like toil versus human-computer interaction versus new capabilities, you can't mix them up. We look at what is someone trying to do. So what's a knowledge worker workbench look like? So the ability to access all this unstructured information better so they can do their job without just spending a bunch of time looking around. That makes a whole lot of sense. Software engineering workbench. And there's so much going on there. I read this great article about 20 new tools that you could use to do code assisted programming. But how do we say, all right, there's a lot of new capability there. I think in the future, it's not generate code. It'll be more like an extension to your IDE. So code analysis, test case generation, some code generation, but more, like you said, a writing assistant, super spell check to close your loops and things of that nature. I think it'll become integrated into the workflow, just like any other advances we've had does that. Data science and engineering, clearly. Things like sales teams. They have a very complex sort of job that they do that all kinds of support can be provided for it. So we took a step back and we said, let's have a set of workbenches. Right? Work is now shifted into the digital realm. This is the workbench we do. And rather than listening to a vendor pitch, which happens all the time, or non-practitioners of the art deciding, here's what I'm going to invest in to make you more productive and put a metering on you, which again is another managerial mistake that happens all the time. We said the guilds, the people actually run that discipline. Let's have them evaluate the capabilities. Let's get the recommendations if this makes it better for me or not. And that's where you start filtering out things which are, yes, the capabilities there, but it's just not that useful. This is really hard to do, and this makes it so much better. And we're using that to guide all of our investment decisions. So our software engineering guild has come up with a collection of recommendations, which we've distilled to a set of tools that we're letting them use in order to understand what that productivity is. Office work, same idea. How do we help people generate more things? What I don't want to do is you have people generating massive amount of text that no one can deal with. So the person on the other side just uses Gen AI to distill it back down to an outline, and you haven't created any new information. You just expanded and and contracted the same amount of stuff. So it's really the people are saying this helps me do my job. And what I profoundly believe is everyone wants to do good work. It's really hard to measure productivity. There's an old line in software engineering. It's been attributed to Bill Gates. Kind of sounds like him that, measuring software engineering productivity by lines of code is like measuring aerospace engineering by how heavy the plane is. Right. So I do think the ultimate measure is people saying is, does this help me do my best work? That's where we're investing in. And they're the only ones who can tell us that. So I'd encourage everyone not to look at generic capabilities or generative AI, but say, what's the workbench you're doing? And when we did this analysis, last thought, because it so often happens when you have something headlines like Gen AI, is people are saying, yeah, this could be helpful, but I got 4 other big boulders in the way. If you could move those boulders, then I can take advantage of the other thing. So while you have great managerial enthusiasm to invest in the new thing, sometimes the best thing you can do is just move a different boulder. And this type of analysis is helpful with that too.
Very good. And so once you figured out your workbench and
Yeah.
how it might change, how do you then make sure people keep up, and how, in terms of investing in training,
Yes.
reskilling, because this is another really important factor that organizations need to get right in order to really leverage AI.
Yeah. And this is one we're working through. And I think because both the tools can be very powerful and there's a lot of expense at times associated with it. What we found is if you think about it as a workbench, then how do you make sure for that specialized tooling that the training, the ongoing support, mentorship, and things like that are there? So we don't call it a mistake, but we, like many companies, we piloted things by you just roll it out and see if people like it. And what we found is tuning and tailoring it to our environment. Not just how does that work, but how do we do it here? Taking that step. That's why I say it has to come through the disciplines or the guilds or whatever you want to do it. The software engineers will tell us what they really need out of this stuff. And that has to be our feedback loop for that. And then one of the things we're doing is we're actually saying, I won't invest in the licensing unless we're willing to make an equal investment in the training and the learning opportunities to that. Because no matter how cool and compelling it is, unless you people give them a chance to stand down, learn what it is, think about how to apply it to the work, and then adopt it, you're never going to get the returns or results you want. So thinking comprehensively around that. And then the last thing, because in most organizations, and certainly in a large organization like MasterCard, a lot of the sustainability of the benefit comes through the funding of it. So what we're really saying is if you're opening up a job in this job family, you need to equally budget for the appropriate support, training, guild, and licensing for what will make them effective in that. And that's where we're seeing more and more of a separation. It isn't you just buy Office Suite for all of your workers. Now you're saying, what's the right level of investment in a data science engineering workbench, generative and otherwise? How do you tailor to your environment? And what's the right learning and ongoing learning that you can provide for people to get the most out of it? And too many times I see it as like a ROI analysis on buying a tool. That's just table stakes. In fact, you'll never get your money back if all you do is buy something.
Very good. I'd like to look into the future a little bit now and
All
look
right.
at maybe beyond AI or beyond AI today. Where do you think this is all going? What are you excited about? One technology that comes to my mind when I think about other technologies that will be strategically relevant to MasterCard is quantum computing. This
Yes.
is a big threat potentially. Um, how do you explore the potential impact of this? How do you make sure your systems are quantum safe, for example? That's something I'd love to get your view on.
Yeah. And what's the cognitive bias? Hyperbolic discounting. We always too much to the present and discount the future too much also, right? Too much emphasis on that. I think it's the same thing here. And I'll get to quantum in a second because we've talked a lot about AI. I'm fortunate. I started when we were freeing data from application code and relational database systems suddenly unlocked unbelievable value, right? Internet, when we connected the world, mobile, when we brought the internet off the desktop and had it with everyone. I think AI is certainly one of those shifts. And if you live through it, we'll get about half of it wrong. You got to sort out the theater and the puffery from the profoundly material. We're figuring that out. I'll point to quantum as another example of that. When we talk to our board, you have something that could have a profound, either positive or devastating impact on what we do. And there's a non-zero chance it'll happen in your planning horizon. That means you think about it. That means you address it. So we're looking at it in a couple of ways. One of which, and I think has gotten everyone's attention, is on the cybersecurity side, where the entire internet, so much of what we do is based on hard problems that for classical computers to solve. That theoretically, in systems that don't exist yet, could be solved quite easily, or at least much more cost effectively than they could be today. And it'll be asymmetrical. It'll start with more nation state actors and things like that before it crosses over into the general threat community. So it'll come closer, I think, and in faster than what you might see. So I think in pop culture, it's become Q Day, like when quantum supremacy happens and all that. I kind of discount that stuff. But we're looking at that. So we've done two things. We've looked at, can you use quantum to help you with the quantum challenge? So we did a quantum key distribution project. And again, very clearly, it was a pilot as a proof of technology. Worked with Verizon and Cisco and some of our other great vendors to show we could use quantum to distribute one-time keys through the network. So they're invulnerable to a quantum attack because there is no hard problem. There is no math there. It's like the one-time pad in your favorite spy novel. If you can securely deliver it using quantum, you don't have to worry about having something there for the quantum computers to break. So it was one approach. Do we need it today? Absolutely not. As we're building out our network backbone and continue to modernize, are our systems being validated to make sure they're ready for that type of thing? Absolutely. The other thing is on the techniques themselves. The prime number factoring is the primary problem we're using now. National Institute of Technology has published lattice-based encryption techniques, which, at least to date, look much more impervious to what a quantum-based attack might do. So again, we're validating that in our systems. And maybe it goes back to what we talked about earlier, clarity versus proximity. At some point in the planning horizon, do I think general purpose quantum computing will be available? Absolutely. Will it be cost effective enough to solve things? We don't know. Will classical compute still be awesome at all the things it's awesome at and will never go away? Absolutely. It's almost like we talked about with AI. How do you apply that research, right, to solve new problems you couldn't do before? So the security side, we're spending a lot of time on, and that's a big part of the planning that we're doing. And I would encourage everyone to think about that. And at a minimum, moving from RSA or prime factor techniques to lattice techniques seems to make a whole lot of sense. The other side, though, is much of what we do. Think about everything we talked about with fraud, or even we're applying some of the AI. It's a multi-factor combinatory optimization problem. The old traveling salesman problem, whatever we want to talk about. There's lots of those. Finding fraud's a great example of that. Loyalty, affinity. When we were talking earlier about AI and some of the products we have one called Shopping Assist, a company called Dynamic Yield. It's part of MasterCard does that. Can look at all kinds of parameters working with retailers who they serve to give really great shopping recommendations to people out of their whole catalog. Well, what is that? It's a combinatory problem you're trying to solve for. So again, general purpose quantum computing, if we could solve that class of problems easier, things like financial modeling become really compelling. We manage a lot of counterparty risk in the network. Things like loyalty or personalization or affinity become really interesting. And like I said, things that we can do not to worry about someone cracking the encryption we're using, but to further strengthen our systems using that. So, years ago, we worked with D-Wave to do some modeling out there, working with IBM, Microsoft, other partners. And I think it's, again, something which is inevitable. But what you have to figure out is, where do you think it's going to apply? Not how does again become something else for your business, but how does those type of things apply back to your business, both to secure it and then to solve problems in ways you couldn't before?
Very good, Ed. Thank you so much for all your amazing insights today. I could go on now for hours. That was super fascinating, learning about how the different ways you applying AI have a real impact on how MasterCard functions as a business. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
For anyone who ever wants to rewatch this episode or many other episodes on the future of business and technology, simply head to my YouTube channel. Thank you very much, Ed.
Thank you.